So, not too long ago, I was down in California and happened to go to Disneyland for the first time in a very long time. While there, I was honestly really surprised to see how much I still enjoyed myself. I think Disneyland in particular really captures just that classic Disney sense of fun and magic more so than any other American Disney park, which in a lot of ways makes sense given that was the park that Walt Disney himself had the most involvement in. It really is an experience unlike anything else out there when it comes to American Disney parks. You ain't topping this, Disney World, nice try. But while I was there attending one of the Animation Academy classes that they have set up in Disney's California Adventure, I just had one idea running through my brain the entire time. Was the Disney Animation Renaissance just all about autism? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, what in the world are you talking about? That sounds completely ridiculous. And looking at it on paper, you might be right. However, let me explain myself. For those unaware, the Disney Renaissance was something of a revival period for Disney's animated movies overall. In the 1980s, the company had seen a series of pretty notable flops, and their financial situation was not looking too good whatsoever. As a result, they came to the conclusion that they really had to rethink how they were going to make movies going forward if they wanted to stay afloat. So after bringing in a bunch of American Psycho lookalikes from Paramount Pictures and a bunch of fresh new animation talent, the Disney Renaissance had begun. The Disney Renaissance officially began with the release of The Little Mermaid in 1989, and it went all the way up to 1999 with the release of Tarzan being the final film in the Disney Renaissance. Or, depending on who you ask, Fantasia 2000 was actually the last Disney Renaissance film, which I personally believe that as well. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to be looking at all the movies that people generally consider to be part of the Disney Renaissance, that being Little Mermaid up to Tarzan. And no, unfortunately, a Goofy movie is not included in that, as much as I would like to talk about that one. A Goofy movie is easily one of Disney's greatest achievements. But you might still be wondering, okay, so now I know what the Disney Renaissance is, but what does that have to do with autism? Well, the funny thing about that is, a good chunk of the protagonists featured in the Disney Renaissance films are actually autistic coded. Now, when I say autistic coded, I don't mean the characters are actually said to be autistic in their films, because they aren't. What I do mean is, a lot of these protagonists actually show off behaviors and mannerisms that a lot of different autistic people are able to see themselves in. Probably the best example of Disney doing this would be Lilo and Stitch, which is like one of the most autistic movies ever made just in general. A lot of autistic people tend to connect to Lilo in this film, and even Stitch to some degree as well. But even before Lilo and Stitch, Disney was already creating autistic coded protagonists for each of its animated films. Now that being said, I wouldn't say necessarily every single protagonist in the Disney Renaissance necessarily comes off as autistic coded. However, I think a good majority of them show very distinct autistic traits that you can see within them. I think the ones that really distinctly show this the most are Ariel from The Little Mermaid, Belle from Beauty and the Beast, Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules even from Disney's Hercules, and also Tarzan from Disney's Tarzan. Believe it or not, each of these characters actually showcases a certain facet of what it feels like to be autistic. And they actually show this in pretty meaningful, really interesting ways. So today, I want to talk about why each of these characters is actually a good autistic coded character, and how they might be able to help autistic people feel seen in a way they might not be able to otherwise. I'll also be talking about how these characters can actually be used as a basic template in some ways for those looking to create autistic characters for their own media. Creating authentic, believable autistic representation I think is something that's more important than ever these days, and I think these characters offer a really great basic template for those looking to write such a character. To start, let's start with Ariel from The Little Mermaid, the movie that kicked off the entire Disney Renaissance. I feel like Ariel in particular has really come to be an icon of autism coding in the last several years or so. And this is something that her voice actress Jodie Benson actually recognizes as well, since she's talked about Ariel's appeal to those on the spectrum before.
And when I hear the story of a child who's never spoken before, whether it's on the spectrum of autism or Asperger's or whatever it may be.
And heck, she's even met up before with one of the stars of Love on the Spectrum, who has openly stated that she's a fan of Ariel and Disney as well before. Not gonna lie, Jodie Benson just seems like a really sweet person overall. Ariel as a character really displays a lot of different autistic traits, probably most notably her hyperfixation on the human world and the objects of it. She has an entire collection of trinkets that she's acquired from the human world that she seems utterly fascinated by, and determined to collect even more of them to learn about this world that seems just out of her reach. This is very in line with how a special interest or hyperfixation generally works for an autistic person, since as opposed to just taking a general interest in it like a neurotypical person might, an autistic person will usually absolutely throw themselves into the thing they're hyperfixating on and want to learn as much about it as they possibly can. I know for me personally, this is definitely something I have with my general hyperfixations on film and animation. I own countless books on those subjects and I do a lot of research on them too. In a very similar vein, Ariel has a huge collection of things that she's gathered up from the human world that allow her to learn more about that world. It's really her own very tangible way of expressing her love for this world that she's never been able to go to. And it's also sort of her own unique window into it, since she takes each object to Scuttle to figure out what purpose it serves in the human world in order to learn more about it. It's also very obvious that she's somewhat of an outcast in the mermaid society, since she thinks and views things so differently than they do, and she's also a lot more open-minded with her thinking than her father, King Triton, which of course leads to a lot of tension over how she views the human world and the things from it as opposed to how he views it. And interestingly enough, because of this, and I think this is somewhat of a lesser discussed point of Ariel as an autistic coded character from this movie, because of the fact she doesn't really relate to or think like any of the other mer people in her society, a lot of her real friends are actually animal characters. This actually can be a common thing for autistic people overall, since they'll often have a very strong bond with animals and want to hang around them as opposed to other people. This isn't necessarily every autistic person, of course, but I do know at least a few other autistic people that have told me that they have a therapy animal that they enjoy hanging around when they need to de-stress. So honestly, Ariel finding solace in the company of different animals is actually another very autistic trait as well. I think perhaps the other really big autistic trait that Ariel shows that also is one that's not as discussed as much is a really strong sense of justice and really distinct morals. She's willing to risk incurring her father's rather one-sided wrath by saving a human man from drowning, since ultimately she views this as the right thing to do, and rightfully so. She's someone that's incredibly pure-hearted and always wants to do the right thing no matter what situation she's in. It's also these sensibilities that leave her open to emotional abuse by her father, King Triton, and also manipulation by Ursula, the main villain of the film. Obviously, this doesn't apply to necessarily everybody on the spectrum, but there are some autistic people that are so driven by their morals that they may lose sight of when someone is clearly manipulating them. Ariel is somebody that always wants to see the best in everybody around her, and while I would say this is a good trait, it obviously does leave her open to manipulation, and unfortunately, this is something I can personally relate to without going into detail. I think, however, the beauty of how it's showed in this film, Ariel's ability to see the best in everyone around her isn't displayed like a bad thing at all. It's very much shown off as a strength of hers throughout this film, since it is the thing that allows her to win over Prince Eric by the end, and also convince her father that mer people and humans can coexist in harmony. It's a really great angle on it all that I think this film really succeeds at, and it's just nice to see the ability to see the best in others as something that's celebrated here. Overall, Ariel is honestly a really great autistic coded character, and she's one of my personal favorites. There's a reason a lot of autistic people really like this character. She's absolutely great. But even though Ariel was the autistic coded character that kicked off the Disney Renaissance, she was far from the only one featured throughout it. Just 2 years later, in 1991, we got Belle from Beauty and the Beast, who is an amazing protagonist throughout Disney's history overall, and one of their best autistic coded characters too. Belle is very similar to Ariel in the sense that she's very much an outcast, and a lot of the people around her don't really understand the things she does and view her as rather strange. Heck, that's literally what the entire opening song of this film is about. She also has a very clear hyperfixation, much like Ariel did, but instead of collecting artifacts of the human world, she collects books and loves to read them. She gets very engrossed with the books and the worlds that they provide her with, which honestly is also a very autistic trait as well. A vivid imagination and a strong ability to visualize things. She very clearly has a strong feeling that she doesn't really feel like she fits in the village that she and her father are in, and also her hyperfixations result in her being bullied by Gaston for them. Gaston insults her hyperfixations and interests and then asks her to marry him. Wow, sounds like a great guy there. I also find it very interesting that she excitedly tries to share her hyperfixations with those around her, such as the baker in this one scene, but nobody really seems to pay her much mind at all.
I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice.
I think this is definitely a very common part of the autistic experience overall, trying to share your hyperfixations with those around you, but either they shut you down or don't really show much interest whatsoever. I do know a lot of other autistic people that have told me they relate to Belle in this scene, and I myself do as well, since unfortunately it's just a very real part of being on the spectrum. Not Not everyone is gonna share your hyperfixation, especially if it's a neurotypical person, but I think that's what makes connecting with other autistic people such a great thing. In a lot of ways, autistic people can really see other autistic people on a level that neurotypical people just really won't be able to. It's honestly a really beautiful thing, and it's also this unique perspective on the world around her that Belle has that allows her to get to the Beast and get close to him and help him change his perspective on the world around him. The Beast is a very jaded person that is essentially given into despair and closed himself off from any human contact, that is, until Belle arrives. Belle is so different than any other person he's interacted with before, and she also healthily challenges his beliefs on different things. As they slowly get to know each other and get accustomed to living together, they slowly fall in love as well, since they realize just how much they complement each other. I think in a lot of ways, you could actually see this as a parallel to how an autistic person can easily balance out and complement an allistic person, and also challenge their worldview. Belle also very clearly doesn't require a conventionally attractive partner because she appreciates more when people are willing to be their authentic selves around her, and that they love her for being her authentic self. This is a huge reason that she ends up picking Beast over Gaston. Gaston very clearly does not actually care about Belle, he cares about what she can do for him. Beast really doesn't care about that at all, he has no reason to, he just loves her for who she is. And she recognizes that and loves him right back. I guess also in this way, you could possibly read the Beast as some sort of form of neurodivergent as well, since, like I said before, neurodivergent usually sees other neurodivergent people on a very different level. I think either interpretation is honestly pretty valid here, whether you see the Beast as also autistic coded or just allistic. But one thing is definitely for sure, Belle herself is 100% autistic coded. Much like Ariel, she's another Disney character that a lot of autistic people really resonate with, and I actually found a lot of different forums from autistic women talking about how they see themselves in Belle when researching this video. And some of them even said they found out they were autistic because of Belle. Honestly, it's stuff like this that I think really shows the value in having autistic coded characters, especially ones that can speak to females, because honestly, it's still very, very hard for a woman to get an autism diagnosis these days. It's definitely gotten better than it used to be, but it's still pretty hard for a female to get an autism diagnosis in the year 2025. And I think really, regardless of gender, it's just really nice to be able to have a fictional character you can see yourself in, especially as an autistic person. In a world full of neurotypical people that may not fully understand you or even chastise you for just being yourself, it's honestly kinda nice and comforting to have a fictional character you can see your autism in. And I think that's a big part of the reason autistic coded characters are so popular and so widely discussed in this space. But the Disney Renaissance wasn't just done creating autistic coded characters only with Ariel and Belle. 5 years later, they ended up releasing the Hunchback of Notre Dame, which also featured a great male autistic coded character, that being Quasimodo, the main character of this film. I think especially with something like Disney's Hunchback, this case is really interesting since the Hunchback of Notre Dame had already been adapted several times before to film before Disney got a hold of it. But strangely enough, it seems like the Disney version is the only version of Quasimodo that actually comes off as rather autistic coded. I think a lot of this has to do with the way Disney actually went about adapting Hunchback, since in many of the previous adaptations and the original book, Quasimodo technically isn't the main character and he's just part of the ensemble. If anything, I think you could argue that the main character in the original version is just the cathedral itself. But by making Quasimodo the main character, Disney of course had to flesh him out more rather than making him the sideshow movie monster that he often was in previous versions of Hunchback. And by developing Quasimodo more as a character, we actually see a lot of different autistic coded traits pop up in him. Hunchback as a film is very much about prejudice, and a lot of the things featured in this film are very much applicable to today as well. And I think a lot of what we see Quasimodo go through in this film can actually be likened to autistic prejudice in some ways as well. In the opening to Disney's Hunchback, the main villain of the film, Judge Claude Frollo, actually kills Quasimodo's mom and is about to kill him as well after finding out he's a deformed baby. It's only after encountering the Archdeacon who tells him he must atone for the murder of Quasimodo's mom by taking in Quasimodo himself and raising him that he doesn't actually kill him. But even while raising him, he chooses to keep him locked away in the Notre Dame bell tower since he views having Quasimodo around him as something that'll soil his reputation. He constantly tells Quasimodo that he's ugly and undeserving of being around other people and that he's not like other people at all. Essentially, in this situation, Quasimodo is an unwanted son. And I find this uncomfortably applicable to today's society where a lot of people would rather have a dead child than an autistic one. Man, Disney's Hunchback was really ahead of the curve on so many things. We'll never get a Disney film like this ever again. Mulan. I also find this interesting because this is actually a direct change that Disney made to the source material. In the original novel, Quasimodo was actually shunned by society day one, and he ends up retreating into the cathedral as a result of his own will. However, in the Disney version, Quasimodo has no agency in this. He is quite literally forced into the cathedral and this new life by Frollo, who doesn't want him to be seen by the world around him. He views having to take care of Quasimodo as a burden. The thing he dreads the most is other people seeing Quasimodo or finding out that he cares for them, because he wonders how that'll affect him and his status. He doesn't raise Quasimodo because he cares about him, he only does it because he fears what God or the Archdeacon might do to him if he stops doing this. Honestly, I think this is a feeling that a lot of people on the spectrum can unfortunately relate to in a lot of scenarios. The feeling of being seen as the family embarrassment just because you were born a different way, and that might lower your worth in society's eyes. Obviously, this isn't the case in every scenario. There absolutely are good parents of autistic children out there. But I think perhaps for an autistic person coming out of a more toxic situation, perhaps with more narcissistic parents who only view their children as an extension of their status and want autistic children to hide or mask away different parts of themselves to make them look better. I think in a situation like that especially, the stuff we see in Disney's Hunchback automatically becomes very relatable. It's saddening, but unfortunately this can be a very realistic thing for autistic children to go through. It's also very clear that much like Ariel or Belle, Quasimodo does have his own special interest or hyperfixation. In his case, his hyperfixation is on building models, and he's actually built a very impressive model of Paris. Man, I wish I had your skills, Quasi. Being locked away in this lonely bell tower for all his life, he's pretty much had all the time in the world to contribute to his hyperfixation. I also find it interesting that after he meets Esmeralda, he actually adds a model of her to his town. This is actually another very autistic trait as well, since it's him going through his hyperfixation, something that he knows and loves a lot, and using it as a way to show affection for someone that he just met and connects with. For other autistic people, this might come in the form of drawing personalized portraits for their friends, or making a 3D model of something they like. It's a way of utilizing a skill or hyperfixation they have and something they're very familiar with doing in order to connect to those around them. I honestly really appreciate Hunchback for showing this as well, since it's often a way that autistic people feel seen. We are often able to feel seen through people who relate to our hyperfixations as well, or at least take some sort of part in them. I also find it interesting how it's treated later in the film when Frollo ends up lashing out at Quasimodo and actually burns the doll of Esmeralda that he made. Especially here, it's not just treated as some hobby that Quasimodo has, it's treated as a fundamental part of who he is and how he feels seen by people. When Frollo destroys a product of Quasimodo's hyperfixations, he is very intentionally trying to destroy a part of Quasimodo himself. Much like how a toxic parent might try to snuff out the autistic traits in their child that they don't want to see. It's really through meeting Esmeralda, someone else who was also persecuted in her own way, that he is really able to accept himself for who he is and realize that everything Frollo told him from the get-go was always a lie. I honestly really like this because it gives Quasimodo very clear agency and allows us to see things from his perspective. I think one very notable mistake that a lot of movies that try to showcase autism representation can very easily make is not giving the autistic character their own sense of agency or even really making them a character to begin with. This is especially apparent in things like Sia's Music or the movie The Unbreakable Boy, which came out this year. In both of these movies, the autistic character in them isn't really a character at all and definitely doesn't have their own agency. They simply exist to build the other neurotypical characters up around them. That's absolutely not the case with Quasimodo though. He is very much a character with his own agency and his own sense of who he really is. I think this is a really beautiful thing, and I think any media looking to create an autistic character should really take notes from Disney's Hunchback. But even after creating 3 really great autistic coded characters with Quasimodo, Belle, and Ariel, Disney wasn't done throughout the Renaissance period. In fact, I think you could actually make a very good argument for the last 3 protagonists of the Disney Renaissance period for actually all showing different autistic traits. That being Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. Now, hear me out on these. Let's start with Hercules. I feel like a good chunk of the time when it comes to male autistic coded characters, usually the more intellectual approach is taken, like someone like Milo Thatch from Disney's Atlantis, or even Abed from Community. Now, obviously this isn't always the case, like with the character I just discussed, Quasimodo being an example of that not being the case. However, especially with a character like Hercules, this feels like a direct antithesis to more intellectually inspired autism coding. Hercules obviously is very strong, that's kinda what he's known for. But I think the interesting thing about this is is that his strength is actually what causes people to not want to be around him. He's judged from the get-go for his clumsiness and seemingly not being fully in control of his own body. Rather than giving him a chance to get it right and show that his strength can really be used for good, the people around him would rather preempt him getting it wrong, and they automatically judge him and shun him just for who he is without really giving him much of a second thought. I think this especially is very relatable for autistic people, since oftentimes we can be judged for just being who we are without people really giving us much of a chance to prove ourselves or show what we can do. It's honestly why for the longest time I didn't really like people knowing I was autistic, since there's a lot of preconceived notions that do come with that. Just like how Hercules is judged very superficially for just being someone who's super strong, autistic people can be judged very superficially just for being autistic. A lot of the times it can feel very unfair and like people aren't actually getting to know the real you, so this is a very relatable thing for me and a lot of other autistic people as well, I imagine. In Herc's case, these preconceived notions that people have are used as an excuse to exclude him from anything they do, which unfortunately I think is also very relatable as an autistic person as well. And I think arguably, kind of like Ariel, you can also see Hercules connect more to animals than people around him. Probably the most blatant example of this being Pegasus, who's Hercules' companion at birth and also throughout most of his life going forward. He and Pegasus very clearly do show a very deep bond with each other, much like how Ariel had a very deep bond with Flounder and Sebastian and Scuttle. Horse therapy is also a very common thing for autistic children to utilize, and actually I used this a lot when I was a kid in particular. So that aspect especially rings home for me. Let me know in the comments if any of you had autistic horse therapy as well. I hope I'm not the only one. Also let me know in the comments if there's any other autistic coded Disney characters you think I should discuss in the future. I really love talking about this stuff in general. I think probably the most blatant autistic trait that Hercules displays, however, is his ineptitude in different social situations. Even in his first real hero situation where he has to rescue Meg from a centaur, it comes off as a big social faux pas. He clearly does not quite respond to the situation that might be the most befitting here, since even Meg snaps at him. I also love how literal-minded he is here, since he ends up actually using his head when Phil tells him to defeat the centaur by ramming into him at full speed. Exaggerated, but I definitely feel you on that one, buddy. He's also very unsure of how to react or reciprocate when he and Meg are on their date, and she's very clearly flirting with him. She's sending him a lot of signals, and he's very clearly picking up on it, so it's not that that's going over his head, he just doesn't know how to respond to them. And this is definitely something a lot of autistic people can relate to as well. Honestly, I think Hercules especially is a really great example of taking those autistic traits and quite literally making your strength in this situation. It's also legit one of my favorite Disney movies of all time. Like, it's so fun. Also, Hades is the best Disney villain, don't at me. Next, we have Mulan, who's another really great autistic coded protagonist that came at the tail end of Disney's Renaissance. Mulan as a character I think speaks to a lot of different people from different walks of life, but autistic people are 100% one of those groups. From the get-go, much like all the other characters we've talked about here, we can already see that she's a social outcast and she thinks very differently than everybody else around her. She doesn't fit the societal norms that people have set for her. Not necessarily because she doesn't want to, she does want to bring honor to her family and she does try to become a matchmaker in order to do so. However, this ultimately backfires horribly because it's just not something she's good at and it's not really her. Her entire journey throughout this film is very reflective of her trying to accept herself for who she is while still finding her own way to bring honor to her family. Even from the start, we can already see she's very capable of thinking outside the box and providing perspectives that other people might not have otherwise. In the film's opening montage, she actually helps another person win a chess game using her outside perspective. And it's also out of the box thinking that ultimately helps her win the battle against the Huns and the final battle against Shan Yu. Whereas every soldier in that big battle scene with the Huns is preparing to face the Huns head on, she's able to take another perspective and thinks outside of the box and causes an avalanche to destroy the Huns that way. And she does the exact same thing in the final battle with Shan Yu, using a bunch of fireworks to blast him off the roof rather than facing him head on. This is also another very autistic trait, being able to provide another solution or perspective to something that neurotypical people probably wouldn't have. That's even how she ends up climbing the pole during the I'll make a man out of you scene, since she finds another solution to climb it that all the other soldiers hadn't thought of. There's a lot of different celebrations of this autistic way of thinking in general throughout this film, and it's honestly really nice to see. And honestly, I think you can see a lot lot of different parallels between the song Reflection that's featured in the film and autistic masking. Like, some of the lyrics are literally, if I wear a mask, I can fool the world, but I cannot fool my heart. I feel like a lot of this is very on the nose. Mulan feels like she has to mask that part of herself because it's not what society wants of her or the people around her. And by the end of the film, she ends up learning just to be happy being who she is and also see that as her strength as well. It's honestly a really great message and a very empowering one for a lot of autistic people overall. And now, the last autistic coded protagonist of the Disney Renaissance is none other than Tarzan. Now, hear me out on this one. Much like every other autistic coded character we've talked about here, Tarzan is very clearly ostracized from the people around him. However, unlike all the other characters we've discussed here, Tarzan gets more of a polite ostracization, if anything. It can be very easily compared to an autistic person being in a community that knows it's wrong to shame autism on paper and knows what autism is, but at the same time is not so subtly like, can you be your authentic self somewhere else? Yeah, that kind of ostracization. Yippee! I think Tarzan already shows a lot of autistic traits right here even, since when Turk and the others try to hint that they don't want him around, he doesn't really get it at all. All these subtle and some not so subtle social cues are completely lost on Tarzan, and this is definitely something a lot of autistic people can relate to overall. Tarzan really wants to be accepted by those around him, namely the other gorillas at the start of the film, and this is best exemplified during the Son of Man sequence. We see him mimicking different behaviors of the jungle animals around him to kind of figure out quote-unquote how he should behave, since he figures once he can do that, he'll actually be accepted by the people around him. This is very much an autistic trait and I think can easily be likened to autistic masking. Tarzan feels the need to mask the parts of him that make him stand out from the gorillas in order to try and feel accepted by them. This is something autistic people often do to try to feel accepted by neurotypical people. They'll try and mask the autistic parts of themselves. This is a very relatable thing for autistic people overall, and I know myself I definitely relate to it since I used to mask a lot. Obviously now I'm much more comfortable being my authentic self, but there were definitely times in the past where I felt like I would have to mask to fit in. And I think that's just a very common thing for people on the autism spectrum overall in their journey to accepting themselves for who they are. And that's definitely very well portrayed here in Disney's Tarzan. There's also very much the lack of social cues and the taking things very literally as well here. When Tarzan initially meets the other humans, he does not understand personal boundaries and he definitely doesn't understand social cues either. Having been raised by apes his entire life, there is obviously a very massive language barrier between him and the other humans. And I think this can very easily be seen as a parallel to things that can get lost in translation between autistic people and allistic people. Tarzan also has to be taught social rules that seemingly everybody else already knows by Jane and the other humans. Either that or he just ends up imitating what they do in order to figure out how he should behave in a neurotypical society. When he and Jane first meet, he already tries to start figuring out how to speak her language by repeating things he hears her say. This is called echolalia, and it's actually how a lot of different autistic children learn how to speak generally too, starting out. Echolalia is actually also something that autistic people try to use sometimes when trying to figure out how to use sarcasm or different tones of voice in a given conversation. They may try to imitate different tones of voice or different phrases they've heard other people use before, sometimes not always to the best effect. And that's reflected very, very well in Tarzan, but it's not something that infantilizes him either. He's not shown as dumb or primitive just because he doesn't speak the same way the humans do, he just has his own way of communicating, much like an autistic person usually does too. Honestly, it's really refreshing to see this sort of thing embraced here and not really bashed whatsoever. And honestly, I think that's something that could be said for all the characters that were discussed here. Probably the greatest thing about all these different autistic coded characters from Disney's Renaissance is that none of their autistic traits are really shamed whatsoever. Obviously, these people might be socially awkward or not do all the things other neurotypical people do, but that's not something that they're infantilized or belittled for here whatsoever. If anything, each of these characters is praised for their differences and they're highlighted for it too in a really positive way. And honestly, I think that's really what any piece of media should be looking to do when they're writing an autistic character. You shouldn't create a character that's infantilized or only exists to build neurotypical people up. You should make a really well fleshed out autistic character that can stand on their own two legs and people can still see themselves in, like all of these characters I just discussed. I think in a lot of ways, the Disney Renaissance protagonists are actually a really great template for anyone wanting trying to learn how to write an autistic character. I would much rather have autistic characters like this for representation than anything from The Unbreakable Boy or music. While probably all of these are unintentional representations of autism, they do allow autistic people like myself to really feel seen in a way that oftentimes we just don't really get in media. I do think autism representation in film has definitely been getting better as of late, but it definitely does flounder quite often still. But even if Hollywood never really figures out how to make a really good autistic character, I can always go back to these autistic coded characters and see traits of myself in them and find solace in that. Honestly, I think that's really the beauty of autistic coded characters overall. There's just sort of an undeniable comfort of being able to see yourself in a Disney character that you might really like. I do hope in the future if anyone is looking to write an autistic character, they'll look at the Disney Renaissance protagonists, since they're some of the best autistic coded characters out there. But what do you think? Am I wrong? Are these characters actually bad autism representation? And what other Disney characters do you think might be autistic coded? Let me know down in the comments below. But regardless, thank you so much for watching till the end of this video. I really appreciate it. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button and also subscribe if you haven't already. I make tons of video covering film and animation overall, so if you enjoyed this one, you'll probably like the other videos I have planned as well. If there's a particular topic you think I should cover here on YouTube, be sure to join my Discord. We have a suggestions and questions channel there where you can suggest things for me to cover here on YouTube in the future. You can also check out my letterbox to see what movies and shows that I've seen before, sometimes movies and shows that I won't cover here on YouTube. You can also follow me on all my socials like Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, yada yada yada. All those links are down in the description. Special thanks to my patrons DDC1996 and Trayvon Gibson for supporting me over there. And also special thanks to Belle Games, Jared the Rabbit, You the Guardian, and David Deister for supporting me as a YouTube member. I appreciate you guys putting in the extra monetary effort to keep me doing what I do here, and I appreciate you for coming to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it or learned something new from it. But for now, I've been Otterly Noah, and I'll see you on the other side. Bye!